Well, hello, everybody. This is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to Rattlecast number 142. So glad you could join me on this fine Sunday morning. We have Erin Murphy as our main guest today. She'll be here with us in about 10 minutes. But before we begin, I should say that Rattle is a publication of the Rattle Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit working to promote the practice of poetry. We've been in continuous publication since 1995 and are unaffiliated with any other organization. We just do this because we love poetry, and I know you do too, so please do click the like button, share, make sure you're subscribed, all that good stuff to make sure poetry spreads around the internet. It would be very much appreciated, so do click something right now. I'm trying to adjust the camera, get in the right spot. There we go. So we always like to start with the Poet Respond poem. And today's poem, it made me just daydream for the longest time just about the title itself. The title is so fascinating, and then the poem is just wonderful too, with where it goes at the end. Here's today's poet, Sarah Etlinger. Hey, Sarah, how you doing?
Hi, how are you? Thank you for that. That was wonderful.
Yeah, it's just great to see you. So, yeah, I am, as a poetry editor and as a master of professional writing from USC, I should know what an intransitive verb is probably, but I didn't. And so I had to look it up. And the idea of love being an intransitive verb, which is a verb that doesn't take an object, is just such a great, I just love that concept. And then the poem rolled out so beautifully from that. So what inspired this poem, and where did you come up with that?
Well, the title came as I was writing it, and I'll get to that in a minute. But actually, I have a friend, Martin, and we worked together, and we were sitting in his office, and he said, "Hey, you know that thing you said, I don't know, a couple months ago about the American flag?" And I was like, "Probably." And he said, "I've been thinking about it." And he told me this, he's a historian, so he was thinking about it like historically and all of that stuff, and we both expressed how, it's been co-opted, right? Like people feel like they own the flag and nobody else does, and all this thing, both because I'm a rhetorician, so I'm looking for those kinds of things. But he said some of this stuff in the conversation, and I went back and I taught my class, and I was thinking about just like that idea of that he's been thinking about this for a long time. And I think we ultimately disagree on what we think the flag means, but I think that's his point. So to get to the intransitive verb part, I think I was talking about transitive versus intransitive verbs in my poetry class to my students. So I think that term was lodged in my head. But as the poem says, I want to be a person that can be so capacious, right? In the sense of there's this thing I disagree with, or that I have a reaction to, or I don't like, or is not beautiful. And yet, some of us can love it anyway.
Yeah, it took me back to when I was taking classes in comparative religion. And, the idea was that the point of all religions, no matter which one you're looking at, is to move from a self-centered consciousness to a universal-centered consciousness. And it occurred to me that could be thought of as taking your love from an object-oriented place into a universally-oriented place, to make it intransitive, which is just such a cool idea. It's like the fundamental basis for all the things we try to do as we grow spiritually, which some of us do through religion and some through poetry.
Exactly. And I am not someone who is, I'm like that girl who's poetry, but also, I think the way, somewhere in the poem it says, I want to be a person who can love others without putting myself into it. And I think that's the moment that I kind of decided, okay, maybe I'll make this an intransitive verb as a title. Because it can be, and it is, but also it's a poem, right? Things don't have to line up exactly in the world. You can test out that premise, that claim, that warrant, whatever, in a poem, and have it not resolve it or not. And I think, that's one of the ways we can grow spiritually, right? In a poem, to quote you. So.
Yeah, for sure. I just love, I read these poems on Saturday morning, and then sometimes there's one that just makes me think all day, and I love that. So this is one of those.
Oh, thank you.
Let's hear it. Go ahead. Love is an intransitive verb. I'll put it on screen, and why don't you go ahead?
Oh, you're gonna put it on? Okay.
Yeah. You read your own copy, but I'm gonna have it.
Oh, okay, great. That's what I was doing. I was like, I have it on screen. Okay. Yeah. Love is an intransitive verb. It says he's been thinking about the flag and how he's come to understand it is not just the empty symbol. What he loves about it, he says, is that it can represent all of us, what the promise of America could be. He wears it on his sleeve like the badge of the patron saint of lost causes. We all want to help one another. I've been thinking about him thinking about the flag. I've been thinking I want to be a person who loves the flag and loves thinking about America. I want to love so much of this misshapen and misbegotten abundance, the tattered, bug-ridden underbelly, rats in the subway, garbage dumps and rivers swollen with bacteria, the plastic and refuse that washes up on beaches as dunnage, shell hash, the bacteria that invaded my grandfather's blood, turning it septic, my mother's uterine metastasis, threatening my own genes like a covenant. I want to love the politicians, the people who want to vacuum carbon emissions out of the air, the billionaires and celebrities who jet off to space instead of solving world hunger or poverty. It is easy to love when everything is beautiful. I want to be a person who can love others without putting myself into it, the way the sun embraces the world and highlights its imperfections. Here's a cracked, abandoned cement wall. Here's the withered ancient ivy snaking up its shabby back. Here's where the thick vines ruin the view of the window, outline the jagged stained glass so you can't see the world outside anymore. Here's where ivy grew.
Yeah, just a beautiful poem. I love that metaphor at the end too, the visual there, representation of the idea. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that, Sarah. And of course tying it into various news stories in the poem too to make it relevant. I appreciate it, and so glad you could join us this morning.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun.
Yeah, take care. Okay, yeah, that was Sarah Etlinger with Love is an Intransitive Verb. And later in the show, toward the end, at the 2-hour mark, we're going to have Tuesday's poet as well, which is Susan Vespoli, who's going to come with an update. All her poems, if you remember from a few episodes ago, maybe a month ago, her poems are about the problem of homelessness. And she has another poem up there that's going to be Tuesday's poem, so she'll be joining us in about a little less than 2 hours. But right now we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to go to Erin Murphy, today's poet. So I'll put this up and be right back in just a moment. And we're back. Thanks for your patience. As I mentioned, Erin Murphy is today's guest. Erin Murphy is the author and editor of 13 books, including Human Resources, forthcoming from Salmon Poetry, and Taxonomies, her newest book, which is right here, a collection of demi-sonnets, a form she devised that is just out from Word Poetry. She's also the author of Assisted Living and a whole bunch of other books. Her most recent edited anthologies are Body of Truth, a collection of narrative medicine essays, and Creating Nonfiction, both of which won gold medals in the Foreword INDIES Book of the Year Awards. She's a professor of English and creative writing at the Pennsylvania State University, Altoona College, where she has received the Athleen J. Steer Teaching Award and Grace D. Long Faculty Excellence Award, and the University-wide Alumni Award for Excellence in Teaching. She also serves as poetry editor of the Summerset Review, which we'll talk about a little bit. And coincidentally, she's also roommates or next-door neighbors to Todd Davis, who was the guest just a couple weeks ago. So I didn't even know that. But, yeah.
Yes, he's got the office a couple of doors down, but he's also a good friend.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, I had no idea that you both. That Altoona seems like a great place. I mean, first of all, I had no idea, but it does seem like a wonderful college environment.
Yeah, I was one of those ignorant people who thought that Philadelphia was Pennsylvania until I came to Pennsylvania, and it's so huge, and there's so many really interesting cities, and Altoona is one of them. And we also just have a phenomenal creative writing faculty at our college. We have 5 full-time creative writing faculty, which is amazing considering, we've got a little over 3,000 students. So yeah, I'm lucky to have Todd as one of my colleagues.
Yeah, it just seems like such a great place to be. And I love that that Pennsylvania area with all the hills and every valley's everywhere. It's just so beautiful, especially and so green, compared to California.
Yeah.
So your new book is Taxonomies. So do you want to start out reading a poem from that, or what did you want to read first?
Well, I was thinking I would love to read The Internet of Things, which is the poem that won this year's Rattles Poetry Award People's Choice Award. And so I wanted to thank all of the Rattle readers who voted for The Internet of Things, and wanted to share that poem first, if that's okay.
Yeah, for sure. And I just realized I didn't put that in the bio. I should have put that in your bio, that you were winner, of course, of the Reader's Choice Award for last year's Rattle Poetry Prize.
Trust me, that will go in all of my bios from now on.
Yeah, I thought I had
and
added
maybe
it,
my
but apparently not.
tombstone. I mean, I'm pretty sure I'm going to put that everywhere. T-shirts, tattoo.
Well, great.
Yeah,
Let's hear this poem. Then we'll talk about it a little bit too.
Yeah, that was a great honor. So the poem is The Internet of Things. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's an economics term. And I have an epigraph with the definition. Noun, the networking capability that allows information to be sent and received by objects and devices. The Internet of Things. The low tide riverbed silt of things. The cloud-swept distant hill of things. The open bedroom window in spring of things. The moonlit cricket symphony of things. The pitter-patter tin roof rain of things. The 50-year marriage loose skin of things. The clipped winter light of things. The stippled lymph node of things. The grief. Oh, the grief. The brief, ecstatic flight of things.
Yeah, just a beautiful poem, and what everybody loved was the music of that. Just the way the rhymes work through, and the way it opens up through deeper reading. And it struck me too, reading it now after having just read Taxonomies, that it's a kind of taxonomy too, even though it's not a demi-sonnet. So for people who don't know what a taxonomy is like a categorization scheme, I guess you would say.
Right.
And that kind of is. I mean, it kind of, so what was it? How did this poem come to be, first of all? And why wasn't it a taxonomy, and why wasn't it a demi-sonnet?
Yeah, so those are 2 good questions. This poem came to me from 2 places. One was I kept encountering this phrase, the Internet of Things, in the news. And I just thought it was such an interesting phrase to use because it's sort of encompassing everything, but also saying nothing at the same time. And at the same time, I have 2 administrative roles at my college. I am chair of our English program, but I also help faculty through the promotion and tenure process. And one of my colleagues in physics had written in his narrative statement for his promotion about his work in the Internet of Things. And so right at the same time, I'd been seeing the word around a lot. I read that, and it was maybe one of the few times when administrative work actually led to a poem rather than squelching, poetry altogether. And so I just started thinking about, well, what's the sort of equivalent of that, or maybe the antithesis of that, in our lives, in everyday life. And so that's where that came from. But you're right, it is sort of a taxonomy. It's a catalog poem. It's a catalog of different things that relate back to that original inspiration. And for me, catalog poems, whenever I read them, I feel almost like I'm watching like a gymnast in the Olympics, and you're like, is she going to stick the landing? Because endings are the big challenge, right? In a catalog poem, like how do you keep from it being just a list? How does it become more than that list? And when I'm writing them, I feel that same sort of suspense, will I be able to go somewhere different with it? And sometimes they work and sometimes they don't, right? In this case, it was that movement to first illness, the hint of illness, and then grief, that helped me kind of pivot from just a list to something more, and helped it open up more. But yeah, it is similar. The taxonomy poems are sort of micro versions, maybe, of this. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because you mentioned how important the ending is, and your form that you invented, and I think 3 of your books are demi-sonnets, or just 2, 3.
3, yes.
Yeah, it's so, a demi-sonnet would be like a half sonnet, because demi means half, so it's 7 lines, and then the feature of it is that there's a rhyme at the end. The end has a rhyme somewhere that's kind of hidden a lot of times. Like sometimes it's the same line, sometimes it's like 3 lines up in the middle. You don't really know where the rhyme is going to come from, but there's always ends with a rhyme. And that's a way that you stick the landing too, which is interesting. So talking about that sticking the landing feeling, the Internet of Things does, and these demi-sonnets do. Can you explain that form and how that form came to be? Because it's got its own Wikipedia page. I noticed the demi-sonnet. So so I don't know, like, when did you conceive of that, and like why? How did that come to be? And just say more about the form itself.
Yeah, sure, I will. Yeah, I love that you made that connection with the stick the landing too, because I think that's true. That is part of the form. So, it basically has the 2 rules, the 7 lines, and either a near rhyme or a full rhyme at the end. And like you said, the rhyme can be kind of hidden. I developed it about 12 years ago, 2010. I wrote what I wasn't calling a demi-sonnet at the time. I wrote a few of these little 7-line poems, and I thought, oh, this will be a series of 3. Then it'll be a series of 5. Oh, maybe it's 12, and the next thing I knew, I'd written 120 of them.
Oh, wow.
And then stuck them in a drawer for about 6 months, because you know how it is, maybe this isn't anything. But when I came back to it 6 months later, I pared it down to about 80, and that became my first collection of demi-sonnets. It's called Word Problems. And I found that in the process of writing them, when I wrote that initial 120, that it ended up feeling a lot like when you're learning a foreign language and you start dreaming in the foreign language. I was dreaming in demi-sonnets. And everything I encountered in my day became potential material for a demi-sonnet. And each subsequent collection I've done, so Taxonomies is my 3rd collection of demi-sonnets, has felt the same way, that it's very immersive, and whatever it is that is my focus. So my 2nd collection of demi-sonnets was Assisted Living. It came out in 2018, won the Brick Road Poetry Press Prize. And those are poems about caregiving. And the last section has to do with my late mother-in-law, who lived to be 99 years old. She was a retired concert pianist. And so everything in that collection kind of revolved around this idea of the life cycle, and then end of life and caregiving. And then Taxonomies, as you mentioned, has to do with this idea of scientific classification, but these poems classify things you don't normally think of classifying, right? Elements of the human experience. So that's a little bit about the form. They're kind of addictive, I find. They're addictive to write.
Yeah, it's true. It's cool. It's almost like the way the haiku community sort of, because they're sort of epigrammatic and short. It's not that hard probably to write one a day, right? And so
it's like, it's hard and not hard. It's one of those things where you can feel like you have a draft, in a single setting. It's the idea for it that you can be sort of dwelling on for a long time,
but so
I think same with haiku.
How it like informs, it can inform your experience of just regular life, because you're always like looking for some thing to like get a hook in that can become one of those sonnets. Whereas, if you're thinking in terms of epic, expansive, long poems, you're sort of, it doesn't really have that aspect where it like regulates your day through poetry. So it's a similar kind of feel.
No, you're right. And I write really long poems too. So it's nice to be able to commute back and forth between the two. And I do find that having a shorter form helps me to always be writing something, even during the semester when I'm teaching or doing my administrative roles. I can kind of dip in to the demi-sonnet form, and it keeps that part of my brain working. Yeah.
Do you want to read a couple of those since we've been talking about them?
Absolutely. So I thought I'd start with a poem called Taxonomy of Cell Phones, which is on page 31.
Thanks for remembering to say that.
Yes. And it's interesting when I talk to my students, I'll tell a story. So when I was in high school, a couple of students went out. I grew up in Richmond, Virginia, and they went out when there was a flood in the James River, and they got caught and disappeared. No one could find them for a while. Well, they were actually stranded in a tree. And their boat, drifted away. They were stranded in a tree, and they got rescued by a helicopter. And it was a big deal in the 1980s. And when I've told my current students or recent students about that, they say, well, why didn't they call their parents on their cell phones? And I say, well, we didn't have cell phones. What? I'm sure they wish they did. They did not. They were fine. They were rescued. They were fine. So this poem is called Taxonomy of Cell Phones. In 1990 BC, before cells, I chatted with a stranger in a laundromat. We've been friends ever since. Now a communication device keeps people from talking to each other, our faces half aglow in the screen eclipse. We cradle phones like baby birds who've slipped from the nest, feed them from our fingertips.
Yeah, and that's a great example just of the form itself. You can see the fingertips and the eclipse rhyme, which is hidden way back there. And that's sort of the general. It's so interesting to have this kind of trajectory for every poem too. Like the arc of where it's headed. That the length of time you're going to have to sit with this idea, and it's a cool experience reading all the poems. Let's do another one since they're short. We should probably do two at a time.
Yeah, we'll do. So on page 80 is the taxonomy of spills. Let's see if I can find it here. Taxonomy of spills. Milk, but don't cry over it. Black opal ooze of oil. Birds trapped in slick straitjackets. What's the phrase for saying too much? Spilled his heart? No, as if truth is violence, spilled his guts. Guns kill 100 souls a day. We are all slipping on sidewalks thick with blood.
There's Taxonomy of Spills. Again, this is the book Taxonomy. New poems by Erin Murphy. New demi-sonnets, I should say, and that's from Word Poetry. So Erin, how did you come into poetry? I'm always curious about that. Like how long have you been writing, and what was it that drew you? And what was what's your progression been like as a poet?
Well, I always knew I wanted to be a writer as far back as second grade when I checked out a really fat book from the school library, and it happened to be the autobiography of Louisa May Alcott. And I was just so proud of myself for reading this 200-page book. And I said, well, I'm going to be a writer. And I think it's really interesting now looking back on that. My mom's a high school English teacher, and we have a pretty small extended family, and out of 12 of us, 9 of us were English majors, but everybody's doing something a little different with it. But she was a high school English teacher. And so we always had a lot of books, but she was the first in her family to go to college. And she always says at the time she was given like basically 3 or 4 choices. It's like, you can be a teacher, you can be a nurse, you can be a secretary. And then flight attendant was always one of the things, that was thrown out there. And I think it's so interesting that only one generation later with me, when I said I wanted to be a writer, that was completely fine with her. She never tried to convince me to, do something quote unquote practical. And yet everybody else, when I would mention it starting in second grade, would say, oh, that's really funny, but how are you going to make a living? What I thought I was going to do was write fiction. And also in second grade, wrote just a brilliant short story about a horse that could play the piano. And then all the way until high school, I really thought maybe fiction would be my thing, or at least prose. And part of that, I think, was because so many of the poets we read in junior high and high school are these, it's the canon of dead white guys. The poems themselves, the way they're taught in school, often feel like, they're puzzles that only the teacher knows how to solve. And they felt exclusive that way, and also a little boring. Mm-hmm. And so at one point, my mother gave me Lawrence Ferlinghetti's Coney Island of Mind. And I thought, wow, so people write poems that kind of sound like the way we speak. That's interesting. That was really a first. So that's sort of the easy answer, but a more complicated answer to that is that going all the way back to elementary school, I think there were other things that I didn't realize at the time were in the sort of poetry family for me. So my mother, as a high school English teacher, also would moonlight as a bartender. And one night, a local DJ was getting rid of, I guess they were changing formats to 8-track, it's really the new thing. And so he was getting rid of this like oil drum full of 45 records. Oh, wow. And she said, hey, I think my daughter would like them. And she brought them home. And I remember like just going through and listening to these records. I was in about 4th grade, and like Radar Love, like that song, like just really spoke to me. I remember playing that every morning before 4th grade. I play Radar Love. A lot of the Beatles songs, same. And I think I was really hearing the poetry in that without thinking of it as poetry. And then the other thing was we had some stand-up comedy albums. So Flip Wilson was really big, in the early 70s. I remember listening to that album over and over again. And I think the comedy and the timing and how, the economy of language used in stand-up comedy, I think both of those things ended up really influencing me. By the time I was applying to college, I knew I wanted to do poetry. I went to Washington College, a small liberal arts college on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, which has an incredible endowment for bringing in visiting writers. And so I got to meet some amazing writers during that period, including James Tate. And that ended up influencing my decision to go to UMass for my MFA and to work with Jim Tate, who became my thesis advisor. So that kind of was the trajectory. But it's only kind of in looking back that I realized there was some poetry early on that I didn't necessarily think of in that genre. Mm-hmm. But that kind of got me going.
Yeah. So since we're talking about that, I mean, what do you feel like what's the difference between poetry and fiction and stand-up comedy? I mean, like what makes poetry like a different art completely? Do you know what I mean? Because they all, obviously poems have line breaks usually, and we say them in a little different, more musical way. But right. But what's really the difference? Do you have what's your conception of that?
Yeah, it's interesting that you asked that, because this is something that comes up in my classes a lot, because I also write and teach creative nonfiction. And for me, creative nonfiction is really, it uses the elements of both, fiction and poetry writing. So you have the imagery that you have with poetry and a lot of the poetic elements, but then you also have some of that storytelling and character development and even dialogue, et cetera, that you have from fiction. And sometimes my students will say, well, why does it matter that we label these things? Mm-hmm. And I have to agree with them a lot of times. And my daughter, who, when she was younger, got forced to come to a lot of poetry readings, poor thing. It's probably the reason she's the one non-English major in the family. But anyway, she would say, if you hadn't told me that was an essay after I'd read an essay, if you hadn't told me that was an essay, I would have thought it was a poem. And so does it matter that we have these different designations for the genres? One of the things that I say to my creative nonfiction students is that in that case, I think it is important, because that is the one of the genres where it is supposed to be true to life, right? And I think because you might have an ending that is based on something that actually happened, not sort of, any possibility of what could happen, it does change, I think, your orientation to the piece when you know that, mm-hmm. and your expectation for the piece. But I also have to agree with the students, and in some ways it doesn't really matter, right? I mean, what matters is how the piece holds up on its own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, I think I would say, speaking of taxonomies, I mean, we have categories for things when they're useful. So there's something useful about the distinction. To me, it's always sort of where the piece of writing lives. If it's like more in your body or like in your mind, I think that's the
That's
distinction
an
I always
interesting
make.
way to, yeah, that's an
Because poetry
interesting
is
way
so
to think about
embodied,
it.
like it's like the voice and the breath and the rhythms of movement and the heartbeat and the iambics and things like that. And prose just, I mean, but then there's the whole overlap, like anything, like
Right.
so many categories overlap. Like is an El Camino a car or a truck, that kind of thing. So I don't know. So and then those areas, like someone mentioned in the chat already, Martha Deed mentions James Tate, who's kind of a groundbreaking influence in blending those two together. Um, and yeah, it's just the way we categorize things is always interesting, and you can't help thinking about
Yeah,
that after looking at taxonomies.
what Jim Tate really taught me, and it was great to learn this early on, was that poems can be funny.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of times, and it's so interesting if you read a funny poem at a reading, sometimes people don't know if it's okay to laugh. Like they feel like, poetry needs to be something really serious. And I've gotten increasingly interested in this idea of the range of emotion and tone in a single poem, so that you can have something, really serious, but you can also have, humor, in the same poem. There's a poem that maybe I could read that kind of demonstrates
Yeah,
that. Would
that'd
that
be
be
perfect. Yeah.
okay?
Mm-hmm.
So it's called Debriefing, a Poem in Parts. It's a slightly longer poem. I think you might have that.
Yeah, I have it here.
Once I sent you. Okay. So there's one thing I need to explain about this poem, and that is that there are a few sections that use actual military terms, and I define them. And so each section is called language redeployment. The other thing I should mention is that at the heart of this poem is an experience that I had with a former student of mine that, probably was the most meaningful experience that I've ever had with a student. So it's called Debriefing, a Poem in Parts. I should mention, I was very honored to have this win the Normal School Poetry Prize. Nick Flynn was judging that. 1, my left leg. My left leg struts up the street in search of a full-bodied cup of cardamom coffee in a cafe where men in snug trousers talk with their eyebrows. My left leg lingers by grilled kebabs and blood-red pomegranate juice, by vendors unscrolling grapes for late-night shoppers. On a candlelit veranda overlooking the Tigris, you'll find my leg engaged in a cutthroat game of backgammon, or caught up in the rapid fire ticks of domino tiles. My leg sits in Haraya Square with lovers who lick each other's ice cream cones as if they're kissing. My left leg has no idea what it's missing. 2, language redeployment, beach party. Noun, a task organization charged with facilitating the landing and movement off the beaches of troops, equipment, and supplies. 3, 6 alternative uses for tampons. Squeegees for dusty night vision goggles, Nerf darts for slow days on rooftop patrol, ornaments for Christmas cacti, toys for flea-bitten alley cats, makeshift spoons for MREs, plugs for bullet wounds. 4, language redeployment, early spring. Noun, an anti-reconnaissance satellite weapon system. 5, at the reading. I am sitting. I am sitting at a poetry reading. I am sitting at a poetry reading beside my student. I am sitting at a poetry reading beside my student, an Iraq War veteran. I am sitting at a poetry reading beside my student, an Iraq War veteran who lost his leg. I am sitting at a poetry reading beside my student, an Iraq War veteran who lost his leg, and we are listening to another veteran read his poems about the war. My student is turning pages in his book, following along with each poem. My student is turning pages in his book, following along. My student is turning pages in his book. My student is turning pages. My student is turning. My student is turning. Mortar, the poet says. Mortar, the poet says, and I think of my student. Mortar, the poet says, and I think of my student thinking of his father. Mortar, the poet says, and I think of my student thinking of his father smashing his fist on the kitchen table at 2 a.m. I think of my student. I think of my. I think of what I think is mine, of what is his. Mortar, the poet says, and I think of how close it is to mortal. Mortar, the poet says, and I think of how close it is. 6. Language redeployment. Free play. Noun, an exercise to test the capabilities of forces under wartime conditions. 7. If you are reading this. If you are reading this, I wish I could hit rewind. If you are reading this, I guess it was a one-way trip. If you are reading this, Mom, don't be sad. If you are reading this, Dad, take care of Mom. If you are reading this, I have one request, bagpipes and amazing grace. Okay, that's 2. If you are reading this, Jake, you can have my truck, but don't ride the clutch because I'm watching you. If you are reading this, it was my time to go. If you are reading this, you already know.
Yeah, it's a very, very touching poem. And that was Debriefing, a Poem in Parts. And is that from a book, or is that?
Yes, so that is from my collection, Distant Glitter.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons I wanted to share that at that point is that it's a very heavy poem, right? But then it also has some little moments of humor, you know, what people are using tampons for, and these sort of last letters that people would write before going off to serve in war. And that really interests me, how you can have that range of tone that you don't have to hit the same note all the time. And Jim Tate was always really great at that, and doing that in his work. And I think I like that about work that I read, because isn't that the way our lives go, right? You can be in the middle of the most, you know, horrible situation in your life, but sometimes you'll have this little glimmer of humor, or something amusing will happen. Sometimes it's the dark humor, you know, that keeps you going. And I'm interested in trying to recreate that in poetry, and also in my creative nonfiction.
Yeah, it's interesting, you know, the interplay of those two, and how the one mode sort of makes the other mode stronger in a poem like that, you know, where the contrasts can play off each other. There's a great essay about the humor that I love by Kay Ryan. It's like, I can't remember what it's called exactly, but she talks about the ah and the aha being a similar source. You know, because they're both like involuntary bodily reactions to some kind of like spark in the mind. And they really do. That's the way, you know, it's the way humor works, is that there's some kind of connection that we didn't know we knew or weren't ready for, and then all of a sudden, like, bam, it's like there, and it hits us. And that's the same way at the end of a poem, or when something, you know, really striking happens in a poem, it hits us too, in a different,
right. It's both, they're both a kind of resonance, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's cool to see that, and cool to see you playing with that. The other thing that poem brings up, it's cool to see the contrast of that with the shorter poems as well. One of the things that was interesting reading your work is that, you know, a lot of times poets feel like, you know, autobiography is really important. And there's a way that your poems manage to, like, you know, like, you don't have to write just about your life and like that's it, you know, like your own perspective is in there in all these poems, but there's a distance too, and like more an observer quality. And this is a good example of that too, where you're sort of there and not at the same time. Like, it could be anybody, as opposed to being autobiographical. Can you just talk a little bit about that? Like, why is it that you're drawn to that, and
Yeah, that's very perceptive, Tim. I just have to say I'm amazed that you read about 150 books of poetry a year, right? And I love that you don't just like obviously skim them. You really engage with them and read them, and then you also, even more impressively, write the prompt every week, at least one. I've heard you read more than one sometimes, so that's amazing. But that is a very perceptive observation, and I think that for me, one of my things that I like to focus on, I also teach, is documentary poetry. And there's, I like to think of that in the most inclusive terms. So poems, based on actual documents. I like to think of document as noun and verb. So you're using documents, but you're also documenting something, right? Another phrase or word for documentary poetry is poetry of witness. But I also think of it in terms of erasure poetry, right? Where you're starting with something and then changing that. Anything that involves any kind of research. So, debriefing a poem in parts is also, while there is some of my personal experience in there, it's also got that research, research into the military terms, research into the veterans experience. And a couple of my collections, one, Ancilla, that came out from Lamar University Press, that's a collection of documentary poems. And the poems are all voiced by people who played ancillary roles in the lives of famous people.
Oh, interesting.
So it might be somebody, Walt Whitman's housekeeper, for instance. And they're, they played, the famous people might be writers, musicians, visual artists, scientists, etc. My forthcoming book that you mentioned in the introduction from Salmon Poetry is also a book of documentary poetry. It's called Human Resources. And these are poems based on labor and employment issues. And so some are erasure poems of HR manuals from certain corporations that will remain nameless. But others are persona poems from different people in different types of labor and employment situations. I'm really fascinated by jobs that people do and the work that people do. I'll tell you just a quick story, something that happened yesterday. So I swim every morning at our local YMCA that I can walk to. And the past week or so, the two older lifeguards, if they're listening to this, they're going to be really mad at me for calling them older, but these two older gentlemen who lifeguard, they had a surprise inspection a couple of weeks ago. And it just so happened that they had done everything right in those hours leading up to this surprise inspection. The pH was exactly 7.2. Mm-hmm. They had just cleaned the filters, all these things. And it just really touched me and amazed me, because they've been talking about it and up till yesterday, weeks later, they've been talking about it, and it touched me how much pride they take in their job and in their work, and they're there at 5 a.m, getting the pool opened. I've been a lifeguard. I know those can be some long hours, mm-hmm. right? You're just sitting there watching other people not drown. And I love that they take that job so seriously, and then are just so enthusiastic about talking about how well it went. It was like they'd hit the lottery, And so labor and employment really interests me. And so this, Human Resources deals with that, documentary poetry as well. So I do like to incorporate elements of that into a lot of my poems. Mm-hmm. And you could say even the taxonomy poems are sort of little nuggets sometimes. Even though there's personal experience, there is sometimes that documentary element as well. And I think that's maybe what you are picking up on in your close reading. And I appreciate that.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it in those terms, but that's exactly it. And as documentaries go, there's different kinds. You can have the Ken Burns style of flat showing the pictures of what's going on, or the Werner Herzog where he's injecting his whole philosophical life into somebody's cup of coffee or whatever. And,
we watched Come On, Come On last night, mm-hmm. Which is that new Joaquin Phoenix film. And that's sort of a meta documentary. If anybody hasn't seen that, really worth watching.
Yeah, definitely. I love Joaquin Yeah, that's great. So I got to see that.
Yeah.
Let's move on. We want to make sure it's great talking, but we got to get some poems too. So let's do some more
Absolutely.
poems.
Okay, I'm going to read a couple more from Taxonomies, pages 74 and 75.
Okay.
So, Taxonomy of the Border 1. They took the children from their mothers. They ignored their cries, the children's cries, the mother's cries. They took the children from their mothers, babies in diapers, cocooned in woven senkas, girls with pink butterfly barrettes, boys in red Elmo shirts, children with sleep in their eyes. Taxonomy of the Border 2. They took the shoes from the children, gnawed off gummy soles with knives like whittlers on the porch of a shotgun house. They slipped laces from the throats of sneakers and boots, then handed back husks of canvas and rubber as if to say, only we have the power to make a noose.
And that was Taxonomy of the Border 1 and 2 from Taxonomies. I'm glad we went back to taxonomy because I wanted to ask just a little bit more because as most people watching have probably already guessed, the prompt for next week is going to be to write a demi-sonnet.
So, yay! I was really hoping that.
Yeah. So, and I always wonder if I should do the prompt for like this week being a demi-sonnet, but then we get to hear your explanations. So that's probably better before we write them. So in the course of writing hundreds of these, what have you found? What is it like what works and what kind of turns do you make? Like, what have you found in like the construction of it and how they function that makes a demi-sonnet work differently maybe than a longer poem?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So one of the things I find that doesn't work is if I'm trying to cram too much into it. The ones that, if I look back, the ones that were the least successful were ones where I was kind of, you would think that what might work best is to overwrite and pare it down to a demi-sonnet. And that might work for some people. That doesn't work for me as much because I find that they end up like a little too sort of overcrowded. And you don't have the kind of spare quality that I think contributes to it being kind of more aphoristic. So for me, they tend to be, I tend to write them thinking about that space and the length. I don't have a rule as far as line length or syllabic count or anything like that. It's just the 7 lines. And then, as I said before, that rhyme that can be sort of an internal rhyme, but then it has the end rhyme that's either full or slant. But I think that what tends to happen for me when I get into the mode of writing them is that they almost sort of write themselves in a way, when I start thinking about a certain image or a certain experience that's going to lead to them. So I'm excited that our listeners are going to be writing some demi-sonnets next week. That's great.
When you mentioned that they don't have any meter or anything, do they strictly not, or do you write some that do have sonnet meters?
When it happens, it's really accidental. It's really not by design. But I do read my poems aloud a lot as I'm drafting them, and so I think rhythm is important, whether it's a regular rhythm. Not so much, but a lot of times I'll think I have the right word, but maybe it's 2 syllables and I really just need a 1-syllable word, monosyllabic word there. And so rhythm will inform a lot of my decisions, as does sound. You mentioned that with the Internet of Things about, a lot of the sort of assonance throughout the poem. And that's really important to me too. And sometimes that can end up generating what comes next in the poem. Sometimes it's less about some preconceived notion of what the poem is going to be about and more about the language itself being generative. That one thing will lead to another.
Yeah. Do you play a lot in form? or do you like to just go by ear? Because when I read the Internet of Things the first time, it was one of those ones where I was wondering if it was like a hidden, like they have those like curginated sonnets and things like that, where I was wondering if there was like some rebroken. It feels very formal in the way that the rhyme pattern moves internally too.
Right.
So I was wondering if that was just by ear, or is that
Yeah, that's by ear. I don't typically do an actual form, any kind of received form, but I do have this. I just found out this week I have a new collection of centos that was just accepted this week from Ghost City Press. What's exciting about those is that it's part of their summer series and they're free to download.
Cool.
So that'll be really fun. But those are centos, and while it's not a form, perhaps in the way that you're talking about it, it is like an imposed structure that you're using. And for those who aren't familiar with the cento, that's where you take lines from other, typically poems. It really could be from anything, but typically lines from other people's poems, and then you put them together into your own poem. Those are, I also find, kind of addictive to work on and to write. And it's really fun to take things that meant one thing in this context, and then it changes the meaning when you put them in the context with other lines. So that's probably the closest thing to a like whole collection of absolute, formal poems will be that little chapbook of centos.
And centos are always interesting. They're two things that we've published very few of that I like noticed, at least. And it took years, like 2 decades almost, to publish a cento in Rattle. Finally, who was it that had cento? I can't remember, and then also like a group poem too, like poem by two poets. Eventually we got one by Denise Duhamel, but it took a long time. And there's something about both where I don't know. There's like the generative aspect of it is interesting in how hard that is to make it your own, I guess. So in a cento, just since we're talking about that, how do you make a cento your own?
Yeah. Because what you don't want to do is to have it be like a lesser version of any of the originals.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, that's how it feels a lot of the time.
Right. And so for me, part of that challenge became taking the line and giving it sort of a new life in this different context. And so much of that depends on the enjambment, right? What you're enjamming it with. And then there are really interesting things that you have to pay attention to when you're looking for the lines, because if the whole poem is in present tense, there might be perfect lines of other poems. And I'm pretty strict about it. I use the exact line. I don't change the tense. I don't change, anything like that from the original poems. And so that, can inform, what lines you select. But I like for it to be something new, kind of like an erasure, right? And an erasure should be something new beyond the original document it's based on. It's either a commentary on that, or it's shifting your perspective on it. And I like in a cento to take those lines, and it's almost like having, different building blocks, and you might if you have kids and you have Legos that you're always stepping on barefoot, you think of there's the original thing that, you spent $80 on for your kid to create. They might make that once. The rest of the time it's going to be, all different things. And I think that cento becomes, the ship one day, and the tower another day, and
the landmine
a bicycle.
You step on it too,
yes, and mainly very painful on your bare foot.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Good explanation. Okay, so I should say, I forgot to say, if anybody has any questions for Erin, leave them in the chat windows, either on Facebook or YouTube, and I will pass them along. But let's hear another poem.
Okay, so this is from page 81. And it's called Taxonomy of Endings That Are Actually Beginnings. The last scene of The Godfather, when the closed door shows Michael's transformation into the boss. Cilantro that bolts midsummer, leaving behind coriander seeds. False sunrise, teasing the real thing. The man who knew your mom was pregnant and left. A knee on the neck.
What is Taxonomy of Endings That Are Actually Beginnings from Taxonomies? Let's hear another one.
Okay, I'm gonna read this poem Amphibious that it's based on, some of my poems come from, actual experience. And once I was at a like dinner auction, and I brought home a framed painting, and it was a painting of a nude woman. And my daughter, who was in second grade at the time, asked if she could take it to school the next day for show and tell. I was a little confused about that. The poem kind of explains what happened with that. Amphibious. My daughter wants to take a framed oil painting to school, a nude with loose breasts and a belly ripe as the full moon. Why? Because we're studying frogs, she says, and it's a frog. I cock my head to consider the angle of the draped arm, but can't get past the female form. My daughter, though, is swimming in amphibians, bringing home scribbled pictures of tadpoles sprouting splayed feet. At night, she sleeps in the bedroom I painted pink, her shelves lined with confectionery, teapots, and cups. By day, she wants to be her brother when she grows up. Lately, she's morphed into a creature who'd rather squirm free than be held. Oh, how we see what we want to see. My daughter, looking at a nude, sees a frog for show and tell. I look at her and see myself.
And that was Amphibious. Not from Taxonomies, but a separate poem.
Right. Yes.
So one of the things that I want to talk about too is you're also the editor, the poetry editor of Summerset Review. So what is your experience like with that? And does that inform your poetry at all, reading submissions? Just tell us a little bit about Summerset Review and what your experience is like with it.
Yeah. So Summerset Review, it's the editor-in-chief and founder is Joe Levins, and he does a brilliant job. And we take fiction, creative nonfiction, and poetry. I'm the poetry editor, and I love reading the submissions and seeing just the variety. We get submissions from all over the world, as I'm sure you do for Rattle, and I love reading through them, and I especially love discovering poets whose work I don't know. I mean, it's also great when you get submissions from famous people or people that well. But when they're people that I've never heard of, it might be, somebody writing in India, and I've never read their work before. And it's really exciting. I don't typically think of accepting the work. We don't have themes, so I don't tend to think of them that way. But sometimes I find that inadvertently, I end up grouping certain types of poems that seem to speak to each other, I think. So they might not seem related necessarily at first glance, but in my mind, I kind of think of them as speaking to each other. We tend to publish about 6 poets per issue. We're published quarterly. We read year round, and we publish, quarterly. So sometimes that makes it hard, though, because there might be a poem that I think is a really strong poem, but for whatever reason, it's not working with this particular, grouping. And so that's probably the hardest part. Is you probably experienced this too, Tim, is like having to say no to poems and to disappoint people. That's not my favorite part.
No, I know, it's the worst part. So I don't know. So how conscious of you are of organizing the poems in that way? Because that's not something that we do at all. Like I like the idea of chaos, like inform, like who knows what's going to happen, and then the poems are ordered by just their last name alphabetically. So, so there's no interjection at all other than like what the subconscious pulls up, So, So
and honestly, there are probably some connections that I'm the only one that would see them, that there might be just, some element of it that is relating to another. It doesn't always happen that way. And like I said, we don't have an actual theme, but I do like the idea, because we publish so few of the poems in an issue, I do like the idea that people could read them all in a single sitting, and that they would kind of resonate with each other as well as with the reader. So
And how much editing do you do? Do you do any hands-on working with the poems or not? Because that's another thing that we don't. Like I just
Right.
take the poems, and sometimes there's like a line that's off or a word that's just not the right word, and I suggest a little change. Or a lot of times the beginning or the ending is like over, written past the ending, or has like a little
Right.
launch pad that they don't need. And so occasionally there's some edits, but usually I don't edit much at all. Do you do that?
I do, but not, not every poem. But it's, you read them and you think like, yes, there's really sort of like the essence of something there that I think is really trying to shine through. And maybe these few little tweaks, we could get there, or rearranging some things. And so I will work with the poets. And it's nice that oh, maybe they're just saying this, but they'll say, wow, I feel like the poem is so much better now, because of these changes. And so I will sometimes take the time to do that. And a lot of times the poems come just, as is, or just the way, I think they should be, and there's no tinkering necessary. So it really just depends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we have time for, I think, maybe two more poems and one more question from the audience. So let's do a poem, then audience, then another
Okay.
poem.
Okay, that sounds good. This poem, it's called City Birds Are Losing Their Songs. City birds are losing their songs. Sirens, car horns, and revved engines drown out sounds of their own voices. So birds choose flatter tunes, become dull cousins to their country counterparts. So says my ornithologist friend who offers the obvious metaphor. We're all overworked, overtired, deafened to ourselves. Sleep, we say, is the new sex. But maybe it's not so different from accents. Like the time my Yankee grandmother badgered the Southern sales clerk for yan until I stepped in to translate. Yarn. Or maybe it's like the cold I had last winter when my voice, husky with congestion, conjured Lauren Bacall. My nose was running. I coughed like a cat hacking up a hairball, but my husband said I sounded sexy on the phone. It's all in the reception, I thought, like reading a poem. We never own what we think we own.
Yeah, great last line there. I love that. The city
Thanks.
birds are losing their songs. Let's see. So a couple questions here. So Cindy Gore asks, you mentioned, dreaming about your demi-sonnets. Did any of your dreams about demi-sonnets inform your writing? And I'm always interested in there's a way that like poetry is a dream in waking life or something. There's some relationship there. So how about that?
Yeah, I wish I had made a note of the actual poems that started in dreams that then became poems. But yes, there were definitely many. My husband always teases me that I do a lot of work in my dreams. They're very, very productive, but he also says I laugh a lot in my sleep. And so sometimes I actually am sort of writing jokes that I'll remember in the morning. Whether or not they end up in poems or whatever is another matter. But yeah, the dreaming part did help. But beyond that, I do find that first thing in the morning before you're fully awake, for me, that's the time really to tap into poetry.
Mm-hmm.
That my mind is just a little more limber than, before the chaos of the day has started to intervene. And that's when I do my best writing. The problem is when you have kids, that's when they kind of need you most, right?
Mm-hmm.
As first thing. So for about a quarter of a century, I had to put that like best time for writing on hiatus. Now that we're empty nesters, I can return to that time of day again, my morning time. But I do find that that's really where I can be most associative. A lot of my poems tend to be associative. One thing leads to another, and that's when my brain, I think, is in that associative mode.
Yeah, exactly. It is. I used to like writing right before bed when I was exhausted, and then that was just the perfect, like that time where you're like falling asleep, but then and you
Right.
aren't aware of where your thoughts are going, and they're kind of like doing their own thing. That seems to
That
be
makes
how.
sense.
Yeah, exactly.
When do you write now?
Never. I don't know. I don't
That's
know.
not true.
I don't know.
I heard your poem about Brussels sprouts.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote the one today, right? 20 minutes before the show started, so that's the time, I guess. Then the morning does work better nowadays because honestly, because I found that I can sleep with melatonin, so I can actually wake up a little
Oh,
earlier.
nice. Yeah,
It
that's
is a nice
good.
time. Like I need quiet is all I need. Like not
Right.
the knowledge that I won't be interrupted is the only thing that
Yeah, that gets
matters.
harder and
Yeah,
harder
it
too with
does. It does.
technology and everything. It's harder to isolate yourself that way. I just have to say, your poem about the Brussels sprouts, it made me laugh because when we were kids, my mom made Brussels sprouts one night for dinner, and my brother was little, and he took a bite and he said, "Brussels sprouts taste like someone farted down your throat."
That is
And
very...
I have not put that in a poem yet, but
Uh-huh.
your Brussels sprouts poem might inspire me to do
There
so.
you go. That's perfect. Here, one last question. This is Patricia McMillan. She asked about the poem in parts. Did the veteran that you wrote about get a chance to read it? And then, what was the reaction? And then just the follow up to that, like, how much do you think about how people are going to react to the poems that you write?
Yeah, those are both really good questions. That student did not. And that student, it was a sad story because he was really struggling, and he ended up not passing the class. And I, given him an extension and everything. And he wrote to me. He said, "I know I'm not going to pass this class, that I haven't, turned in the work." He said, "But I do want to tell you that this has been the most influential course I've ever taken. And I don't want you to think that my not passing has anything to do with you," which was very kind of him,
Mm-hmm.
to tell me that. His mother also wrote to me, I think it was after the semester had ended, saying that my giving him the book, and it was Brian Turner's Here
Mm-hmm.
Bullet, and
Yeah.
Brian Turner was the one reading on our campus, that when I gave him the book, and he also came to the dinner with Brian Turner and got to meet him, and I got his book signed and everything. And she said that she was just so thankful that he had that experience, that really was, kind of a turning point for him. That's one of sort of encapsulates what happens a lot of times with our students, that even the experiences that we have with them that are the most meaningful, it doesn't always mean that they're,
Mm-hmm.
the star students as we measure that, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But that also doesn't mean that the experience wasn't worthwhile for them or for us. That it doesn't always have to be the A+ students, that we learn from, and that are learning the most in a particular class. I did want to say, I mentioned before, Jim Tate had come to my campus when I was an undergrad, and so I loved the opportunity to bring Brian Turner
Mm-hmm.
to this student. That student, probably isn't going to become a poet or go to an MFA program, but hopefully he'll carry that with him and carry that experience, and to know that there are ways to frame, even these horrific experiences of war that you've had. There are ways to frame them, and a way to turn to language in those times. So in terms of the other part of that question, how much do I think about, like, who the audience is going to be? I think I don't think about that so much in initial drafts.
Mm-hmm.
I think that comes more towards publication time. And there are changes that I will make, either to have more of a composite of a particular person if I don't want it to reveal anything that I feel like is private about that individual, or maybe not publish the poem at all
Mm-hmm.
in some cases.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't remember who said, but somebody said on here, like, no poem is worth a friendship, or something to that effect. And
Right.
that's really,
Well, it depends on the friendship.
yeah, I guess that's.
Just kidding. Just kidding.
um, okay, well, let's close out with one last poem. What do you want?
Okay.
What do you want to read last?
Well, so as a poet, so just this week, I got named poet laureate of our county of Blair County, Pennsylvania, which is just an amazing honor. And I'm so excited to be able to take, poetry into the community even more, and go into high schools and talk to students and just introduce them to the kind of contemporary poetry that they don't always have time to teach when, they've got to teach to tests, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the part that worries me about it is a lot of times, people want you, writing poems for their weddings and their anniversaries and Valentine's Day, that kind of thing. And one of the things I tell people, I've had people ask me to, read a poem at their wedding, and I'll say, I've only ever written one love poem, and it mentions colonoscopy. And that usually gets me out of pretty much,
Mm-hmm.
any love related assignment. So this is that poem. This is my one love poem for my husband. It's a ghazal. So for those of you who aren't familiar with a ghazal, it looks like it should be pronounced gazelle or ghazal, but it's pronounced ghazal. It's not very poetic sounding. But they're couplets. They're 2-line stanzas, and each second line of the couplet or stanza ends with the same word or phrase. So you'll hear a word repeated over and over. That really is the form. It's not because I just couldn't think of anything better to say. So this is Guzzle of the Dangling Preposition.
Here, hang on one second, because I think I might not have put it in my file here. Let me pull it up, because I want people to be able to read along.
Yeah. Okay. While you're looking for that, Tim, I will just say that Sarah's poem that she read at the top of the hour, that was Love as a Transitive Verb, I think. Was that the title for her poem?
Yeah. I
have a poem that came out in Concision magazine, which those of you, if you haven't discovered Concision, it's a terrific new journal of experimental poetry. But I have a poem in there called I Feel So Damned Intransitive. So I wanted to mention that, echoing back to Sarah. And since this poem is a dangling preposition, I thought I'd mention that as well. Did you find that poem?
I did, yeah. Yeah, you'd sent it to me, and I said, I added it, and then, in the space of between saying I got it and I didn't actually do it. So,
no worries.
But here you go.
Okay. Guzzle of the Dangling Preposition. I need someone to sing to, undress for, shake my ass at, and shower with. Someone to bitch to, cut calories for, get pissed off at, and make up with. To hold up and be held by when I'm down, to see through, to read to, and with. To wax my legs and bikini area for, and make fun of other people with. Someone to be on top of and beneath, someone to fall asleep and wake up with. To wink at across a crowded room, drink with, talk dirty to, and be flirty with. Someone to apply Vicks Vapo Rub to, schedule colonoscopies for, and floss with. I need someone to lie to, for, about, with. Someone to cry to, for, about, with. Someone to write to, for, about, with. Someone I'd die for, without, and yes, with.
Oh, that was a great poem. And you're in trouble now, because everyone's going to ask you to read at weddings, so you have to read that poem. I have to read
the colonoscopy poem.
It is. It's a perfect wedding
so
poem.
So romantic. I should add, my husband is perfectly fine with the fact that after 32 years, I've only ever written one love poem. He's like, just leave me out of it.
Well, I'm sure. Well, thanks so much, Erin. It's been a blast. I love talking to you, and these poems are great too. So it's really fun.
Thanks so much. I'm excited to listen to the open mic.
Okay, cool. Yeah, thanks for being a guest, and hope you take care, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Yeah, so it's Erin Murphy, and her newest book, of course, is Taxonomies, which is from Word Poetry. You can find more of Erin's work at her website, which is Erin-Murphy.com. That's Erin, ERIN -Murphy, MURPHY.com. And so definitely check that out. All these books are great. Though the one about people being, close to historical figures. That sounds. I want to read that book, and I don't have it, so I have to pick up a copy. But thanks for being a guest again, Erin, and for everybody watching the show today. We're gonna go to a quick break and then do the open lines. As always, I will set up the Zoom link. Put the Zoom in the chat window. Where do I get the link? Every week I forget where to get the link from. participants, invite. That's how you do it. Copy invite link. Okay, so I'm going to put the link in the chat windows on YouTube and Facebook. So if you'd like to join, only if you'd like to join and share a poem, come onto the Zoom link. We have about 45 minutes to do that, and then we'll be talking to Susan Vespoli at the top or bottom or top of the hour, whatever you call it. So if you'd like to join, what you do is email your poem right now to OpenMic. That's openmic@rattle.com. Openmic@rattle.com. Email your poem there so I can show it on screen and people watching can read along with it. And then find the Zoom link, which I'm about to deploy in the chat windows, but only come on to read your poem and then come back to the original link so you can read poems and participate in the chat there that's public and everybody can see and participate together. So if you'd like to join, here is the Zoom link. I have put it on YouTube and pinning it to the top. And over on Facebook, I shall do the same. And then we're going to go to a quick break, and I will be right back with the open lines. And we're back. Thanks for your patience as everybody comes on into the open lines. We have a good crowd here already, 10 people lined up. Dick Westheimer and Audrey Friedman and Patricia McMillan. Caitlin Bucksbaum's here. Susan Cornell. Nivita's here. So what we're going to do, I think the structure of the show, I think I'm decided we're going to always have if we have a second guest, we'll have it at the top at the 2-hour mark, and that'll be the close. So we kind of always gonna have like 45 minutes for open lines. I think that's how we're gonna do it. We'll get to as many as we can in that span. And first, let's go to let's see. So Susan Cornell. Let's see. Let's go to Nivedita Karthik first. Hey Nivi. Yeah. Hey Nivi. How you doing?
I'm doing good, thank you. How about you?
I'm doing great. It's good to see you. So what do you have for us today?
A poem very loosely based on the prompt. So, the prompt was right about the novel. I chose War and Peace, and I took the concept of the novel being war and peace, and I sort of wrote about that. So it's not based on the novel, but on the concept of the novel, if that makes sense.
It does, yeah. And thanks for reminding me, because I forgot to mention that the prompt for this week was to write was it a classic novel? If it was, I should have read it. Or was it just a classic book? Because I wrote
a poem based on a classic novel.
Well, I failed the prompt. I wrote about a classic book instead. So a poem, let me read the actual wording of it. It was a poem based on a classic novel. So oops. Anyway, you can do it wrong. That's fine. Everything is okay here. But yeah, that was a prompt. And if you want to share poems about, current events or just anything you'd like to share, or poems poems that have been recently published, you can send a link to an online thing. That's what the open mic is for. So this is Horrors of War on the Ground based on War and Peace.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, go ahead.
Horrors of War on the Ground. Horrors of War on the Ground. Amid the wreckage in the city, a mother stares at the half-finished sweater in her bag, knowing full well she may never see her son again. In the trenches, deep in the battlefield, a son stares at the photo in his wallet, knowing full well he may never see his mother again. Such is war. Each scrape of the shovel against the cold, hard ground. Each scrape of the shovel against the cold, hard ground echoes in time with the drumbeat of the shelling. Each scrape of the shovel against the cold, hard ground marks the loss of 1, 2, 10, who knows how many. Each scrape of the shovel against the cold, hard ground unearths unwanted treasures of limbs and skulls and unexploded mines. Each scrape of the shovel against the cold, hard ground signals that peace is far, far behind.
A very moving poem. Thanks for sharing that, Nivi. That repetition of each scrape of the shovel, really powerful stuff. Thanks for sharing that. Oh, I think she froze, but that's okay. She was done. But thanks, Nivi. Let's go.
Thank you.
Oh, she's back. There you go. Okay. Let's go to Audrey Friedman.
Hello, Tim. Hello,
Hey.
everybody.
Yeah. Hey, Audrey. How you doing?
Really good. Beautiful day here. I'm sitting outside and enjoying all of you. What a great reading today.
Yeah, Erin's great. So where are you? I can't remember. Are you in the Pacific Northwest or somewhere?
No, I'm near Hilton Head, South Carolina.
Ah, the opposite side. Yeah, that's a great place.
Yeah. Okay. So this one, you're going to see my angry side.
Okay.
My ex son-in-law in Coney Island. The cyclone's carts chug up ancient wooden tracks, laboring like a runner half a mile from the marathon's finish line, muscles cramped, lungs on fire, only raw instincts pushing him ahead. But now he teeters on the apex and begins to topple over the precipice. For almost 100 years, these roller coaster carts have risen, have plummeted, and the impetuous decision to board a ride or a marriage ends either in panic or pride. How many will stand in line to buy the $10 ticket again? Will he display a greater measure of profundity toward his second wife after hurtling in a shuddering cart on rickety tracks toward the devil he's managed to skirt? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that, Audrey. That was Audrey Friedman with my ex-son-in-law in Coney Island. Very vivid poem. Thanks for sharing it.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go to Dick Westheimer next.
Hey, Tim. How are
Hey,
you doing?
Dick. Yeah, how you doing?
Now, this is the one thing that can get me out of the garden on a 70-degree sunny day, 1st of May. Nicely done. Nicely done.
Yeah, beautiful weather finally for once. My mom, I talked to my mom last night. She was gardening all day yesterday too, kind of up by you in Rochester, New York.
Time for two or just one?
Probably just one, I think, because we do have to leave at I have to leave at 11, or I don't know how to say it, 2 hours and 15 minutes into the show.
All right.
So which one do you want to do?
I think I'll do the very short one, the last line spoken by the actor playing Lear.
Okay, is that was from the
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's a Poets Respond poem.
Okay, let me pull that up really quickly then. So explain what that was about.
Oh gosh, the nuclear saber rattling again, and just the sort of the possibility that all of our other conversations are moot, if can be rendered moot by merely one step over a line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. It's something that we kind of take for granted, maybe because we survived so long without.
Yeah, I grew up in the duck and cover days when it was a Cuban Missile Crisis and all that. We had this sense then, and then we sort of abandoned it, and all of a sudden it has returned with a vengeance.
Yeah, I think is it Eric Weinstein who called it the twin nuclei problem, the atom and the atom, and the nucleus of the cell and the atom, both things that could wipe us out.
Yeah,
with like designer viruses or nuclear war.
Right.
We don't know what to do about it.
Yeah, not the least, meteors. And what's your obsession? Mass coronal ejection.
Oh, the coronal mass ejection. Yeah. I mean, that Carrington event, if anybody wants to look up that's the thing I worry about, because it's, with the way society's structured now, it happens every couple hundred years. And if it happens, we're really in trouble. So,
yeah.
And there's nothing we can do about it. But anyway.
Well, it feels the same way about this. So this is the last line spoken by the actor playing Lear. The actor playing Lear looks to the balcony as if seeing there an answer to a question he can't quite remember. He thinks of the groceries he's to pick up. The audience sits silent. Next, to himself, he asks, to be or not to be? But that isn't it. The audience still silent. He gathers himself in the quiet, takes a breath, sighs into his cupped hands. The audience rustles. He begins, oh, reason not the need. Forget, skips ahead. Man's life is cheap as beasts. He stops again. He knows something we don't. Backstage, he's read, the missiles fly. There is no hope. The show must go on. He rips his kingly robe, says the line again. Man's life is cheap as beasts. And again, man's life is cheap as beasts. And again, man's life.
Yeah, it's a terrifying poem. Thanks for sharing that, Dick. And yeah, it reminds me too that was that Look Up, Don't Look Up, that movie. I don't know if you watched that one, but the end of that was such a great scene. I won't spoil it for anybody, but check it out if you haven't.
You mean I have to finish it? I only got part of the way through it.
Oh, really? The ending is good. I like the ending.
Okay. Yeah, it seemed the rest of it seemed a little contrived, but I'll give it a shot at your recommendation.
Yeah, it's a good ending. I liked it. But anyway, thanks, Dick. Good to see you, and thanks for sharing this poem. It was a good one.
Thank you.
As they always are, of course. Okay, let's go to Patricia McMillan next.
Okay. Oh.
Yeah. Hey, Patricia, how you doing?
Hi, fine. How are you?
I'm good.
That was such an interesting hour. Great interview, and what an interesting poet. You find him. Oh, there's my poem. Okay, so I did the prompt. Mm-hmm. I happened to be reading my Antonia by Willa Cather, and I do not know where the rest of this came from, but it is a documentary poem by Erin Murphy's definition, in that I did a lot of research. I haven't finished my Antonia, and I don't even know if I've read Dr. Zhivago or just saw the movie, but this is a mashup of the two.
Interesting. Okay, go ahead.
When Yuri met Antonia. Over espressos, au roi du café, a lull in the great war, Matahari fading in a laminated rear window. They discuss taxes, strikes, and whether men and women can ever just be friends. Antonia says, of course. It was that way with Jimmy in Nebraska, though after Papa shooted himself in the cold barn, unshriven, surrounded by thin livestock and hungry insects, we, how do you say, drifted apart. Yuri nods. He's Russian, also a doctor, so he understands both winter and suicide. Still, things are different now, he must insist. The roof over the whole of Russia has been torn off, and we find ourselves under the open sky. In short, he wants her, won't take no. He'll steal a kiss before she has a chance to plead the husband, children waiting on the farm, before he thinks of his own wife and child abandoned in Vareniko, an exurb. Oh God, Antonia murmurs. Then confusingly, right there, yes, yes, attracting looks from neighboring tables that turn out to be full of partisan soldiers, one of whom, disguised as Jean Cocteau, takes an order. I'll have what she's having. Antonia rises, flees into the night, leaving a false hotel address penciled on a napkin. Yuri pockets it, mutely surrenders. They'd never meet again.
Oh, very cool. That was a great mashup. I love that on When Yuri Met Antonia. Thanks a lot for sharing that, Patricia.
Thanks.
Let's go to Caitlin Bucksbaum next. And also let me admit other people. We have to let other people join in. Okay. So, hey, Caitlin, how you doing?
Pretty good. Yeah, I was thinking it was a pretty small crowd today, but
Yeah,
more people are coming.
I do like you. I think you suggested using the admit button, and it does make it a little easier to juggle. Except the only problem is I have to like move the screen to get over to where the admit button is. But other than that, so what do you have that you want to share today?
So the poem I sent was one that I wrote a few years ago when I was still doing my master's in teaching. And because I was looking for, I didn't have time to write one on a classic novel for like a new one. I did do I did NaPoWriMo or whatever, trying to write a poem every day. And so I've been busy, but that one just didn't come out. So this one was on a very memorable, I don't know why. It was just, we had this write-in at a coffee shop in Anchorage, and I really felt like the winter scene. So this is from my book Interstitials, which also came out 2 years ago. So it's kind of like happy anniversary to my book.
Yeah, happy anniversary.
And my 30th birthday is in 2 weeks. So it's
happy
like
birthday too.
Lots going on.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is called Of Persuasion, and that's a reference to the novel by Jane Austen. And it starts with an epigraph. These were noises which belonged to the winter pleasures. Her spirits rose under their influence, and after being long in the country, nothing could be so good for her as a little quiet cheerfulness. And there's a picture also. Slush and steam, sounds of winter outside and inside, onomatopoetic but unrecognized by the masses until they hear the hissing and the squishing and the art of getting through a December day, Alaska beating to the stretch of its own drum around the fire and ice and everything nice, but not so much as the quiet, the little quiet, small with comfort and lack of conversation, though it isn't all bad when you consider what cheer the season brings, even as the snow sinks softly through the thick air thick with feeling and spirit instead of words, until someone's broken the ice, for better or worse, tasting the sounds of socked-in solstice with their cherry tongue, with pleasure, sniffing at something unsaid, unheard in the long-lost country. If a snowflake falls in the meadow, has climate change turned the world upside down, on its head, whatever that means in the vast expanse of the universe, filled with stars and galaxies like so much cosmic slush and steam, an inside-out song of shared space? It is written. These are the indelible and effortless marks of a momentary, solitary persuasion.
Excellent. Thanks. That was Of Persuasion. Caitlin Bucksbaum. What's the name of the book again?
Interstitials, so nice and difficult to remember and spell.
Yeah, there it is. Thanks. Always a pleasure. Thanks, Caitlin.
And lastly,
sure.
I'm doing a Zoom poetry reading on the 18th. So anybody that wants to come to that, there should be an event on Facebook. But that's a poetry parlay thing where I read and then I read poems of another person, and then the community reads poems of that person too. And I chose Rosemary Wotella Traumer as my influence. So
yeah, she's great. Episode like, I don't know, 50 or so she was on. Do you have a link you can put in the chat window?
Yeah,
put it in the YouTube or somewhere. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna put it in the Zoom first, because YouTube, like, if you put a link in the chat, it deletes it until it can like review it later.
Oh, really?
So I'll post it on Facebook or something.
Okay,
on the
sounds
page.
good. Yeah, well, good to see you, Caitlin. Thanks for sharing that.
Yep, you too.
Okay,
thanks.
Bye. Okay, let's go next to Phil Stern. Hey, Phil, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing great. We can't see if you want to click your camera on, but we can just listen to audio too.
So I have to reboot the software for the camera or something. So I'll just read.
Okay, yeah. So what poem would you like to share?
Okay, it's called When She Says No. You have it?
Yep, I have it right here.
Okay, this is, with the prompt about the old man and the sea. I have the original Life magazine where the novel was first published, as well as a first edition, which unfortunately is all marked up from the many times I taught it. Um, and anyway, I always thought Hemingway got a bad rap for misogyny, but this is a view which probably later came to be reevaluated. He's also so easy to parody. I wrote a parody of The Killers when I was in college. But for me, this novel is a great moral fable about how one must live in the world where creatures who are being true to themselves must sometimes inevitably come into conflict with others also being true to themselves.
Yeah, one of my favorite novels. It was one of the first, probably the first literary novel I loved. Maybe after my Stephen King obsession when I was like an early teen. Then Old Man and the Sea was the first great novel, and that sort of led to loving literature. Maybe.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah. Okay. So I guess I'll read it. When she says no. Every night, somewhere, animal spirits will flare when she says no. A man's belly blood, where ancient ghosts of tusked boars reside, may muzzle but not hide resentment. Santiago did not get lucky, 84 days without a fish. He knew what things were like without luck. How Manolo's parents would not let the boy go on an unlucky boat. How delicate terns could keep searching for fish without luck. How a tiny, exhausted warbler, excuse me, had luck when it found his boat to rest on. And he also knew how man-of-war birds kept circling and working hard to find schools of flying fish, and how he must set his line straighter than anyone, so that when the luck came, he would be ready. But it was the sea he knew best. The young men with motorboats called it Elmar and saw it as a contestant or enemy. The old man, who used only sail and oar, understood the allegory of luck. But he called the sea Lamar, saying it was a woman who gave and withheld great favors. And so in the end, he could love the great fish he could not bring home. If belly blood men only understood Lamar, the other, they might go about their angling less angry.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that, Phil. That was When She Says No, and a great explanation or a dive into the book through poetry. Thanks for sharing that.
Thank you, Tim.
Okay, and now we're going to go to, let's go to Lisa Allison. Hasn't been on in a while anyway. Hey, Lisa, how you doing? Oh, you're still on mute. There you go.
Sorry, I haven't been on in a while. It's been busy poetry-wise, which is good.
Yeah, for sure. It's good to see you. So what do you have for us today?
So I've got this was actually inspired by Erin just talking about using a line from a book or something else.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the title of my prose poem today. And also inspired by her talking just briefly today about how, like, the difference between poetry and prose poems. And I'm moving right now from poetry or expanding from poetry into flash, creating nonfiction. So this could be called either, I guess, but the journal labeled it a prose poem.
Excellent. Do you have, let's see, did you send it to me?
I emailed it to you a little while back.
Okay, let me kind of search. Do you mind if we circle back to you, because it hasn't got to me yet?
Sure.
Then we can show it on screen.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, let me do that, because it's not here yet. So
I put the link. Okay.
Or you could put the link in the chat, or in the yeah. Why don't you do that?
Do you want me to share my?
Oh, no, here it is. It's because I was looking for Allison. I have it. Never mind. So this is this pattern of light wanders all over the ocean. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, and this is from Cloves Literary. Perfect.
Yes. Sorry, I can't see it now. This pattern of light wanders all over the ocean, collecting prey. From the hum of his hospital room, My memory-worn father asks for my elegant friend, Lila with the starlit hair. So I don't remind him how he'd once picked me up at midnight from the now suicided Lila's house in a country that spat on justice, a country we left behind long ago along with Lila and her mother who, high on heroin, poked me out of her daughter's bed with a kitchen knife, said, get out, get out, get out of my girl's life. And Dad remembers not the knife nor my name, and only sometimes the land we left, but says, how wonderful, my girl, to have such a dear friend in this nebulous world.
Oh, that was a great little prose poem. And how do you think about the difference between the two? Like what makes a prose poem versus somebody just wrote to me this morning and said, I write flash fiction. Can I submit that? And I'm like, well, if you call it prose poetry, you can.
Yeah.
So how do you conceive of the difference?
To me, it's the musicality of it right now. Keeping that natural rhythm that you'd often find in poetry, the alliteration, the poetic diction devices, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But I think this one could go either way. I do find there's an immediacy to flash fiction, or flash, in this case, creative nonfiction, that lends itself very well to where are we in that prose poetry or prose.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know. Do you consider that prose poetry, or to you is that more?
I consider it prose poetry. To me, like I mentioned talking to Erin, I feel like it's more, if it's more about the voice, then it's poetry, and if it's more about the scene or ideas that it conjures, it's more towards the fiction part, or the prose part. That's kind of how I conceive of it. But the line, who knows where to draw the line, or what the difference is, and everything contains elements of everything else. So it's always an interesting question. It's just whatever you feel like calling it at the end of the day, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. Well, thanks so much for sharing it, Lisa. Always good to see you.
You too. Thanks, Tim.
Take care.
You too.
Yeah, it was Lisa Allison, and that is this pattern of light wanders all over the ocean, collecting prey, from clovesliterary.com. So do check that out. And let's go to Andrew Tredinnick.
Hi, Tim.
Hey, Andrew. How
How are
you
you?
doing today? Yeah, or this morning, early for you.
Yeah, it's pretty early. I got inspired by snow falling on cedars, which I guess is a classic.
I'd call it. That's a great book.
I know it's kind of been banned even in some places.
Really? For what? What's
in
wrong
your
with
country?
it?
For its, that school banning thing where they don't let certain books in libraries because sex and stuff like that.
Huh. I didn't know that. I read it in high school, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Same here. It's a high school text here. But I got inspired by it, when it first came out. And I put a little note down the bottom of the poem to sort of explain how I've done it. So I might just read that if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. I'll put that up.
So snow falling on strawberry fields after David Guterson. It strikes me that cliches are in a sense classic expressions, albeit overused ones. I was intrigued by T.R. Paulson last week describing her experiments in seeking surprise using cliches in poems. I wondered if I could tell part of the classic story of snow falling on cedars, which features strawberry fields, using now classic cliches from Lennon and McCartney. So 5 of the lines here are from that song. Cliché-ish quotation from the novel itself. The last 3 lines are quoted from the novel. And a glance at a classic cherry field from Basho. The first 2 lines, I was reading a little bit of Basho's work, which is incredibly inspiring, as you know.
Yeah,
so I'll just I'll read from the start. And so the quote from Basho: at Minakuchi, I met a friend I had not seen for 20 years. Our 2 lives. Between them has lived this blossoming cherry. And let me take you down, because I'm going to strawberry fields. Nothing is real and nothing to get hung about, said Lennon and McCartney. At the trial, I met you after years. Between our 2 lives, many strawberry seasons. You let me take you down to play in the old cedar tree, the tryst, the first kiss, yet not the ring. The squall, tragedy, reporting at court, Strawberry fields for sale. Witnesses misunderstanding all they saw. It's getting hard to be someone here. But you know, I know when it's a dream. We bend our egos. Alone, we are nothing at all. Dust in a strong wind.
Oh, very cool, those playing with cliches. Yeah, that's great. Snow falls on strawberry fields. When was that book? Yeah. What's that?
Sorry?
When was the book written? Do you know?
Early 90s, 1994, I think.
Yeah, because I was thinking
95.
I read it in high school, but it doesn't seem that old. So I was wondering if I was wrong. But yeah, that would have been barely in time. Yeah.
And I was just intrigued by the Strawberry Fields Forever story. It almost kind of fits. You know, there's kind of like these two links, and both of those things. It's like the Beatles become cliche in a way, and yet the cliches are incredibly powerful. You know, it's kind of like anything that's overdone becomes a cliche, but in a good way.
Yeah. I mean, every cliche was once a great metaphor.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's kind of like all these things looping around and beating each other.
Yeah, very cool. So, cool combination of things, that poem. Thanks for sharing that, Andrew.
Okay. Thanks, Tim.
Yep. Take care.
Cheers.
Let's go to Jennifer Elise Wang.
Yeah, on the subject of cliches, I've got a poem that I just wrote because I was watching the Coppola Dracula last night.
Oh, cool.
And being a fan of vampire fiction, I was kind of just thinking about how my love of vampires and vampire fiction has sort of shifted as I've gotten older, and my thoughts about Dracula. So yeah, here's my piece. Am I a bad goth for not liking Dracula? I love vampires, and Dracula is our king. I devoured the YA and romances, but the original, our sire, took all summer to read. I actually would have rather gone out in the sun. Coppola's film held me in thrall, but I'm not sure I would give Mina the killing blow if she had to cry tears of lost love, betraying her Jonathan. Gary Oldman is handsome, but I'm more a Keanu fan these days. Did my feminism break the vampire's curse as I think about consent, abuse, xenophobia, and slut-shaming? You can't cover problems and pain with black velvet, red silk, powder, and lace. I still like Bela Lugosi, though.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, good thoughts on that. Am I a bad goth girl for not liking Dracula? Thanks for sharing that, Jen.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep, take care. Let's go to Potter King Badger O'Donohue. Hey, Potter, you there? Uh-oh, let's see. I can't hear you. I think but it's not the Zoom that's muted. It's your mic's not working. Yeah, I got no sound. So let's go to, we'll try it again. Your mic's not working, Potter. Sorry about that. Let's go to Mike Bales. We'll try you later again, Potter. See if we can get it worked out. Hey, Mike, how you doing?
Pretty good. Good show. I had a couple readings here and there. I hosted an open mic reading in a town nearby, Geneseo, Illinois. Just something I've done a few times.
Ah, cool.
So I wrote to your prompt a couple weeks ago about Carl Jung.
Uh-huh.
It was nice to get back into because I studied a lot of psychology in college. I looked them up and they're like, I saw the wheel, the 12 archetypes, and I guess I guess they're all leading to 4 basic needs that people try to make.
Mm-hmm.
I think I try to allude to some of that, but I'm really writing about the artist archetype. And this goes back to me as a flagger. Actually, me kind of maybe looking at the things all around, and maybe a poem would come to me later after I got off work. I emailed it to you a little while ago.
Is this the notes of a creative on the side of the road?
Right.
Okay.
This is notes of creative on the side of the road. Grasses rise from shadows. Nature whispers her secrets. Under skies tinted gold. In open lands. This is the beginning of a poem. I am the sky. Hours spent on the highway. In contemplations when I hold my sign. as wildflowers open their eyes. I am the car and the faces, the passage. I am the one-lane road and the unfolded map of the ordered land. I am the story yet to be told, the footprints I leave. I am the stream, the sun-stippled waters, the lake grown deep. I am the reflections of timeless dreams. I am the gathering of sparrows in a field and angel wings, as I break free from old refrains, a heavenly vision of the world I create.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Mike. That was
Thanks.
notes of a creative on the side of the road, and I could feel it there. I was there with you. Thanks for sharing that, Mike.
Neat. Shadows has to do a little bit with the unconscious, which he kind of refers to that. I tried to get into a few other things besides just the artist archetype. So
yeah, very cool. Well, thanks for sharing that.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, bye. Okay, that was Mike Bales again. Let's go. Oh, let me see who to admit. There's a couple people still coming in. Hopefully, by the time we have about 8 minutes left for the open lines, and then I think Susan Vespoli will be here. Let's try Potter again. See if. Well, no. Let's try Kimberly. Let's see. You got to unmute Kimberly. Well, that's not working either. Yeah, you're not being unmuted. Let's
There we go.
Oh, there you go. Great. I'm glad we got you. Hey, good to see you.
Sorry, that was really hard.
No problem at all. So what do you have that you'd like to share?
I wanted to read a poem that I wrote titled "The Life Cycle of Litotes."
Okay, and did you send that? Oh, here it is. I hear it right here. Yeah.
It was interesting how a lot of the poetry that we were listening to today were about transitive verbs and this and that. And so I thought this might kind of fit in because the litotes is a kind of a strange concept. And I wanted to read the definition of it before I read the poem.
Okay. Just to know, I couldn't open the file. It said it wouldn't open for me, so we'll just have to listen. But that's fine.
Oh dear. Okay. Well, litotes is an ironic understatement in which an affirmative is expressed by the negative of its contrary. For example, you won't be sorry, meaning you'll be glad. The life cycle of litotes. In utero, it is quiet. I am innocent, growing a millimeter per day. I am not opposed to help. I am parasitic. I won't be sorry until I am born. In childhood, I want more. It doesn't taste that bad. I am unbrainwashed. Look for me when I get lost in a crowd. During adolescence, I have more. I eat more. I lie. Listen to me. I am not untrustworthy. I begin to conform and doubt myself. Finally, adulthood. I've had enough. Never forget, I am a shoplifting drug addict, a well-kept secret. Do not underestimate me. End poem.
Yeah, beautiful. Thanks so much for sharing that, Kimberly.
Thank you.
It was Kimberly McNeil with Litotes. Thanks, Kimberly. Take care.
Thanks.
Okay, and now let's see. So I still don't have any audio from Potter. Sorry, Potter. Let's go to Shelley. Hey, Shelley, you there? see. All right, well, Shelley's doesn't seem to be here. Let's go to Bev. Bev Wendell Leatherstone.
Good morning.
Hey, Bev, how you doing today?
Great. That was a great interview. I love that.
Yeah, I just loved it. I mean, it's just there's so many amazing poets in the world. Like, I had no idea until she submitted a poem for the Poetry Prize, and it was one of the finalists. I had no idea anything about her writing, and she's great. So what is it that you'd like to share today?
Yeah, fabulous. So my response today is to the prompt, and I've been trying out that form Pantun, and tried to expand it a little bit so that it's not so stilted. And I'm also curious about next week's demi-sonnet. That sounds great.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun.
So mine today is about Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. Alice in her white pinafore. Portraying Alice, I leapt from my school stage to follow with curiosity the white rabbit. With my cat Dinah, we swept off the page to burrow deeply into our insatiable habit. After following that curious white rabbit to a caterpillar who on a hookah toked, we burrowed deeper to feed our habit, while through tree foliage a cat's smile poked. Where a caterpillar on a hookah toked, Alice was asked if she's 10 feet tall. Was it all a dream or some dope joke? Just eat me and return to someone small. The airplanes asked if Alice is 10 feet tall. They urged her, feed her head, become a sage. But what made her choose to eat and return to small? As Alice, I stretched on that enchanted stage.
Oh, that was excellent. Yeah, I love your pantoums. That's great. Alice in her white pinafore. Thanks for sharing that, Bev.
Thank you so much.
Yep, take care. Okay, and now let's see. Let me see if there's anybody else. So Shelley is here. Shelley Cato, who was also a finalist for the Rattle Poetry Prize a couple years ago. If we can get Shelley to unmute, but she's not. So and Potter didn't have audio. Let's see. Oh, so Shelley has no poem, just listening. Okay, yeah. If you don't have a poem and are just listening, you can always just listen to the regular stream at YouTube or Facebook. You don't have to come here. I assume that's what Susan Cornell is doing as well. Phil Stern. Let's see. So I'm waiting for Susan Vespoli, who should be here any moment. In the meantime, let me see if there's anybody who asked me to read a poem. Here, this is, we have one to listen to, although everybody listening. Okay, so we're going to wrap up the open lines portion on Zoom. Anybody who's listening there can just watch on the regular stream, because you're not going to be able to hear this, but Carla Schwartz sent a poem with some audio, so I'm going to play that as we wait, and hopefully Susan Vespoli will be here in just a moment, but let me get this started if I can. So that goes there. And then we have this poem. Okay. So this is Carla Schwartz. She said, I cannot make it today. She can never make it this time of day. So it's only later shows she can make. But here's a prompt poem inspired by The Ballad of the Sad Cafe by Carson McCullers, which is something I'd never heard of before. And hopefully this will work. This is Carla Schwartz playing it in her own words, or reading it, I should say, in her own words. So here we go.
This is called The Sad Ballad of the Garlic Mustard. It's a poem by Carla Schwartz at CB99 Videos on all social media. This poem was partially inspired by The Ballad of the Sad Cafe by Carson McCullers. The poem first appeared in the collection Intimacy with the Wind by Poems by Carla Schwartz, Finishing Line Press, 2017. You can find it everywhere. The Sad Ballad of the Garlic Mustard. As a teen, I never thought of Carson as a woman. Maybe it was that hard masculine name, but I must have identified more with Miss Amelia and her hard ways turned soft by love than with Cousin Lyman. I felt uncomfortable about Lyman. He popped up like the garlic mustard that emerged in my side yard this April, not entirely unwelcome, the punchy green heart-shaped leaves, bouquets brides might throw to hopeful singles. The roots are tender, white, and radishy. I intended to jettison them, but then read you can cook them. I would have to soak the roots to remove the mud. Miss Amelia might have used the leaves in a beer. She would bring pitchers out and pour glasses all around while Lyman stayed on. I could open a pop-up cafe with all this mustard, sautéed in eggs, a mustard pesto, roots cooked into sauce. Then I read the young ones have more cyanide than the second years do. Bad things can go good. I stare out at all the mustard, bags full in my future, and wonder if I can tackle all this alone, and if I might one day come to love my yard, if sautéing and invasive is sweet revenge.
Another great poem, as always, by Carla Schwartz. That was The Ballad of the Garlic Mustard. And I'm going to have to check out that book, The Ballad of the Sad Cafe by Carson McCullers. Never heard of that before. That was Carla Schwartz at CB99 Videos if you want to find more of her work. Let me see if... so I think maybe the Susan that's here is Susan Vespoli, but I think maybe she can't connect. So maybe there's a problem with that. Oh, no, Susan Vespoli's here. Here we go. Never mind. Hey, Susan, are you there? Let's see. Just bear with us for a second. Hey, Susan. Hi. Yeah, there you go.
I am. Thanks.
Yeah, good to see you. Thanks for joining today.
Thank you for asking.
Yeah, here you go. So, so we have another poem, an update on your son's situation as part of the inspiration. But then, of course, the problem with homelessness in our country is just a huge problem that never goes away, and there's always more to talk about it. Do you want to explain what inspired this poem and that's going to be coming up on Tuesday and what it's all about?
Sure. Yeah, it's so my son was shot in March 12th, and he has been homeless on and off, and we're still going through all the investigation part about what happened when he was shot by a policeman on March 12th. But the night before, March 11th, I knew that he had been somehow arrested, and I was trying to get to the bottom of what happened there. So eventually I ended up getting the the pictures and also the body cam videos, which was, so I looked and what happened, so this is what it's just like what happened. And it was shocking. I mean, it was kind of like I knew and I was shocked at the same time.
Yeah, so. I can imagine. I mean, how hard that must be to watch.
Yeah. It's like I kind of had to know what happened. Did he do something? So it was a little nightmarish. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so this poem also talks about just the problem in general with of homelessness and how we treat it in society. And there's an article that you linked to from the LA Times that's what makes it a current events poem. So can you explain that too?
It's just homeless, individuals. It's growing. I'm not exactly sure what the solution is. Although I think awareness and how people are treated and the respect level. It's like that was what was so shocking to me is the way they treated these people for sleeping and the tone and it's just I think number one, people need to realize they're human beings and to treat them with respect. And so I'm researching. It's a whole new world for me, and I'm researching and find that it has been there was a few years back, was a court ruled arresting people for sleeping in a public place was like cruel. Yeah. And what good does that do? And then there's also articles I read saying that when they're arrested, it just makes their plight worse and worse and worse. It's like it doesn't help. It doesn't help. I don't know. So I mean, for me, just like that's not the answer.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah. I mean, there's health issues, mental health, and in general, and we just treat it like a criminal problem, whether it's with drug addiction or mental illness. People need rehab and they need healthcare. They don't need go to jail and compound all your problems with fines and all sorts of stuff.
Right. And the I mean, it's just the to see the interaction between the police officer, which is totally acceptable in our mm-hmm. In our world, it seems, because I tried to, I'm like so horrified, and there's a lawyer pursuing the other investigation, but it's just kind of like, this is what happens. Mm-hmm. So it's just like, I can't believe this is what happens.
Yeah. So. And just looking through, to have a stock photo to go with a poem just for social media on Tuesday when it comes out, I just went to the stock photo place and typed in homelessness, and just, how many photographs and how, I don't know, like people going out and taking photos of it for stock photograph. I mean, it's just, there's something weird about it that just is wrong, on every level. But anyway, this is a beautiful poem, what you did with this. 20 photos, just heartbreaking and beautiful too. 20 photos from police records of his last night alive. Why don't you go ahead and read that?
Okay, thanks. 20 photos from police records of his last night alive. And then there's a quote from the National Coalition for the Homeless. The criminalization of homelessness makes the struggle to survive on the streets even more difficult. And so here's the poem. The sadness lands at night, a heavy bird standing above your ribs, the weight of its body dropping down through its legs and into your core, making it hard to breathe. Sadness leans against the interior of a tunnel along an underpass you suddenly recognize as the I-17 at Thunderbird, only a couple miles from your house. A black backpack with orange straps, a knit blanket, big gulp cups, a cardboard box, and a pink plastic crate. Graffiti that has sprayed the cement into a cloud. Photos 15, 16, and 17, your son's face. The 18th, his back, head hung to chest in resignation, a hoodie, wrists clasped in handcuffs, his left palm and fingers circling his right thumb, like his hands are comforting each other. Walk off the sadness. Spot a hawk perched on your rooftop AC unit, where a little bird dives and screams at the hawk who just sits there, like patriarchy, like an American eagle, possibly the one on a dollar bill, until it squawks once, then lifts into the air, the small bird in its talons.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that, Susan. A beautiful and heartbreaking poem. That image at the end, especially 20 photos from police records of his last night alive. Thanks for sharing that and for joining us.
Thank you.
Yep. Take care.
Thanks for giving voice.
Of course. That was Susan Vespoli once again. And if you want to learn more about that story, you can find her. Rattlecast was about a month ago. I think it was March 26th or so. So that would have been like episode 135-ish. Yeah, so a whole book of poems about Adam. And now really quick, let me do our poem. So this was my prompt poem, and I reversed my New Year's resolution, if you remember, was to take poetry seriously and not just write quick poems right before the Rattlecast. But I found out that if I allow myself not to write a poem, then I won't. And so that kind of backfired. So I'm going to do the opposite once again, and I'm going to share a poem no matter how little time I have to write one. And this is this goes back to maybe 2 years ago. We had a poem when William Trowbridge was on. He has the old guy superhero poems. And I had a poem written from that prompt that week about Poetry Man as a superhero. And so, and people like that poem, and so asked for more. So in my back of my head, I was like, hey, write some Poetry Man poems. So here is Poetry Man, the superhero. Poetry Man picks up the portable Chekhov. And, oops, let me see. So this is the prompt poem for this week. I have the portable Chekhov right here as well. Poetry Man picks up the portable Chekhov, and already his mind's eye is buzzing at the thought of it. Anton in his wool trousers, somehow heftable, broad arms buckled around folded knees, an ergonomic handle sprouting from his back. Would he be alert in the posture of a briefcase, head out like a hood ornament? How much would he weigh? A tall man for his day, over 6 feet, but made portable by the magic of poetry. Ah, poetry. But this is prose, and Poetry Man tingles at the thought of all that space. He opens the table of contents to find the shortest of shorts, but every list is a list poem, and every string of words is a gem. A calamity at the mill, Sergeant Pishabayev, the chameleon daydreams heartache. An encounter with a letter, the kiss, Anna on the neck, and in the cart, at home, the man in a shell gooseberries about love. The darling lady with the pet dog at Christmas time in the ravine. Overwhelmed at the thought of it, Poetry Man closes the book. That is Poetry Man trying to read the portable Chekhov. And then the Sciku for today was based on this story, which I found really interesting. So this is from MIT. And researchers at MIT this week published about finding a new way to do desalinization, which might have great implications just for the world in general. Usually with desalinization, you have to force water at really high pressure through really, filters. And so the filters need to be changed, and it takes a lot of energy to force the water through it. Like you have to actually create a lot of force through pumps to pump the water through these filters. But these researchers at MIT have found a new system where they use basically an electric field. It's called ion concentration polarization. And they have this briefcase size desalination machine. It only weighs, I think they said it weighs 20 pounds. And you can run it on a solar panel of 20 watts an hour, that's it. And it will filter, make you a liter of water for 20 watts. And so amazing for people in places that are having trouble finding water, and just amazing in the future. Like imagine refilling our aquifers. The California has a huge aquifer that's just the land sinking in the Central Valley because we've pulled so much water out. Imagine reversing that and having a pipe of ocean water going in that's desalinated at a very cheap price too. So it could be an amazing thing for the future if it can scale up. But even if it doesn't scale up, it works in this small scale. So that's pretty cool. And this was my Sciku about it, just thinking about the way the world changes. Here's the Sciku for the day. Spring rain, every salt road's history. Spring rain, every salt road's history. That is your Sciku for today, and that is the show for today. Thanks, everybody, for joining me. It was a wonderful one. I loved Erin Murphy. Great to talk to Susan Vespoli again. She's just a wonderful human being. And early on, Sarah with that first poem was great too. And all the open lines, everything is always fun. I appreciate it. And I'm glad you could be here with us. So next week's guest is going to be one of my favorite poets, Chris Anderson. He's a Catholic deacon. His most recent book is Light When It Comes. He has 2 books. It's one of the last books I blurbed. The Next Thing Always Belongs. And he's just a wonderful poet. He's retired from teaching and taking more time to write now. And he has a great newsletter every Sunday too. But his most recent book is Light When It Comes. That is Chris Anderson for Rattlecast number 143. And as we mentioned, the prompt, I guess I should put that on the screen before we go. The prompt was to write a demi-sonnet. And so, of course, we talked all about demi-sonnets all episode. So that is your prompt for this week, write a demi-sonnet. And then we'll be joining with Chris Anderson, this week's guest on the Rattlecast, coming up 1:43, Sunday, May 8th, the regular time, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. Hope to see you then. Hope you have a great week in the meantime, and I will talk to you soon. Goodbye.